In the year 497 BC, a 55-year-old scholar left his home state of Lu and began a journey that would last 14 years. He traveled from one kingdom to the next with a group of students, pitching his political vision to every ruler he could reach: govern through moral virtue, not violence; maintain order through ritual and righteousness, not punishment and law. Not a single ruler truly adopted his proposals. He ran out of food in the state of Chen. He was chased by armed men in the state of Song. When he was separated from his students in the state of Zheng, someone described him as looking like a stray dog with no home. He returned to Lu at the age of 68, never held office again, and died 5 years later. If the story ended here, he would be just one of hundreds of frustrated thinkers from the spring and autumn period. But the story did not end here. Over the 2,000 years after his death, his name became the most powerful political symbol in Chinese history. His teachings became the intellectual foundation on which empires operated. He was posthumously honored as the supreme sage and first teacher, granted a level of ceremonial reverence second only to the emperor himself. No one wanted his proposals, but everyone eventually wanted his name. The difference was this: when he was alive, people listened to what he said. After he died, people used what his name could do. Confucius's core idea was governance through benevolence. A ruler should first cultivate his own moral character, then use that virtue to inspire the people, rather than relying on force and law. He believed that a well-ordered society should work like this: the ruler acts as a ruler should, the minister acts as a minister should, the father as a father, the son as a son. Everyone fulfills their role and order naturally follows. The theory was elegant, but in an era of warring states fighting for survival, it was utterly impractical. No ruler locked in a contest of life and death had the patience to wait for moral inspiration to take effect. What actually worked was legalism. Shang Yang's system of laws, rewards, punishments, and military efficiency designed to rapidly strengthen a state. The state of Qin used legalism to unify all of China, and Confucius's teachings remained marginalized for over 2 centuries after his death. According to the records, in his final years back in Lu, Confucius devoted himself to compiling ancient texts and teaching his students. He edited the Spring and Autumn Annals and organized the classic of poetry, the classic of documents, the classic of rites, the classic of music, and the classic of changes. Perhaps he already sensed that his ideas would not be adopted in his lifetime. But he believed that if the ideas were written down, someone would eventually find a use for them. What he could not have known was how far the meaning of "find a use" would stretch beyond anything he had imagined. The Qin dynasty's heavy reliance on harsh laws and punishments quickly revealed its limitations after unification, and the empire collapsed within 15 years. The Han dynasty that followed faced a new question: how do you keep a vast empire stable in the long term without relying on fear? Legalism made people afraid, but fear only sustains short-term obedience. In the long run, people rebel. The empire needed something that made people obey willingly, a force that made them believe deep in their hearts that the existing order was reasonable, correct, and not to be challenged. The early Han tried Taoist governance through non-action, letting society heal itself. It worked well in the immediate aftermath of war. But as the empire stabilized, non-action meant the center was losing control over the periphery, and the power of regional kings was expanding. The empire needed an active ideology, one that gave moral legitimacy to centralized power while providing a unified code of behavior for everyone. Confucius's teachings happened to be perfectly suited for transformation into exactly that kind of tool. In 134 BC, Emperor Wu of Han accepted the proposal of Zhongshu and began to establish Confucianism as the official state ideology, placing it at the core of the empire's intellectual framework. But the Confucianism that Emperor Wu adopted had already shifted significantly from what Confucius himself had taught. Zhongshu made several critical modifications. First, he grafted the concept of the mandate of heaven onto Confucianism. The emperor was the son of heaven, and his authority came directly from heaven's endorsement. This concept was not central to Confucius's original thought, but Zhongshu made it the supreme logic of the entire system. The emperor's rule was not to be debated or questioned because it was heaven's arrangement. Second, he took the relationship between ruler and minister, father and son, and increasingly reinterpreted it as a one-directional obligation of obedience. Confucius had originally emphasized that the ruler must act as a ruler should before the minister owes him a minister's duty. If the ruler failed to fulfill his role, the minister could leave or even dissent. The modified version gradually pushed loyalty from a conditional virtue toward an unconditional obligation. Third, Confucianism became progressively tied to bureaucratic selection, eventually becoming the dominant content of the imperial examination system in later dynasties. The empire's most intelligent people were all drawn into a system that used Confucian learning as its gateway, spending their entire lives studying and internalizing this ideology. They were not forced to believe, they came to believe sincerely through years of immersion, which was more effective than any coercion could ever be. What Zhongshu did was not interpret Confucius, he rewrote him. Over the next 2,000 years, every dynasty added what it needed under the banner of Confucius's name. Zhu Si of the Song dynasty created Neo-Confucianism, pushing the philosophy toward a more rigorous system, but also placing even greater emphasis on hierarchical order and personal restraint. During the Ming and Qing dynasties, Confucianism was thoroughly rigidified through the eight-legged essay format required in the imperial examinations. Scholars were no longer engaging with Confucius's ideas, but memorizing and imitating a standardized template. The name of Confucius remained, but the content inside it had been replaced many times over. Every replacement followed the same logic. Those in power took what was useful from Confucius's words and ignored or reinterpreted whatever did not serve them. Confucius said, "If the ruler does not act as a ruler, the minister need not act as a minister. If the ruler fails in his duty, the people may refuse to comply." This statement was steadily weakened in later Confucian systems. Confucius said education should have no class boundaries. Learning should not be divided by birth or rank. Yet the examination system ultimately became a screening mechanism serving the elite. The creator of an idea cannot control what that idea becomes after his death, because the living will always reinterpret the words of the dead according to their own needs. When Confucius was alive, he was an idealist who was turned away everywhere he went. Not a single ruler was willing to adopt his vision. After his death, his thought was reshaped by empires into a spiritual operating system that made hundreds of millions willingly obey, more deeply rooted than any law, more enduring than any army. But this was not Confucius's victory. The benevolence he championed was an inner moral awakening, not a top-down command for obedience. The distance between what his name ultimately carried and what he originally meant to say may have been greater than all the roads he traveled during his 14 years of wandering. This story does not belong only to Confucius. Not every idea gets adopted by power for long-term use. Only those with enough moral legitimacy and enough ambiguity to be reinterpreted again and again will be selected. Confucius's teachings happened to satisfy both conditions. The moment a thinker speaks his first sentence, he loses control over that sentence. What it becomes after that depends on who is using it and what they need it to become.